In today's Farm Report, the USDA released some new reports on Monday, and the results are surprising some analysts. Gary Crawford with the USDA has more.
Certainly we got support for wheat today based on the plantings for winter wheat.
Acting Agriculture Department Chief Economist Rob Johansson, USDA, reported on Monday the 12th that farmers for 2015 will have likely planted 40.5 million acres to winter wheat. Not only would that be 5% down from last year, but as Johansson pointed out, this was a surprisingly low acreage number, surprising to almost every private analyst.
Our winter wheat seedings did come in at the lower end of the trade range, slightly a little bit below. Like I said, that should provide some strength for the wheat futures prices going forward. We'll see what the market does, how it interprets these results.
USDA analysts did increase their projected average wheat price by a dime up to $6.10, mostly based on sales up to now. We'll see if the acreage numbers change that very much, since world wheat supplies are projected larger than expected, 1.7 million tons larger, based on a million ton bigger than expected world wheat crop at 722 million tons, a new record high. Back to the U.S. wheat seedings now. USDA has hard red acreage reported down 3% from a year ago at 29.5 million acres. Soft red down 12%, 7.5 million. We did see an uptick of 2% for white wheat, 44% for durum, but still it boils down to less wheat acreage than expected. What was expected in USDA's round of reports, big stocks estimates for corn, soybeans, and wheat. USDA reporting corn stocks December 1st were 11.2 billion bushels, up 7% from the year before. Soybeans just over 2.5 billion, up 17%. All wheat just over 1.5 billion bushels, up about 3%. However, in all three cases, stocks stored on farms outweighed off-farm stocks. Example, corn, we had over 7 billion bushels stored on farms with only a bit over 4 billion off. Rob Johansson told us that, of course, many farmers are holding on to as much as possible for as long as possible, waiting for prices to go up, but also
transportation issues have been problematic in the upper Midwest, and it's likely that that has slowed down a little bit of the marketing that they were able to do. So we are seeing an easement of those transportation issues in the upper Midwest, and it's likely that a lot of those on-farm stocks that we are seeing will be loosened going forward into the winter and to the spring.
Prices have come up recently. USDA this past week did add a dime to its projected average wheat price, now at $6.10 a bushel, 15 cents added to corn at $3.65, 20 cents to soybeans, taking that average up to $10.20 a bushel. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
The wheat crop around the world has been bountiful.
Small increase in the European Union of about 100,000 metric tons. That's a big crop. That's a small increase on what's a pretty large crop for the Europeans, and they're having a nice crop in corn as well, too.
Acting Outlet Board Chair Seth Meyer says
the big change this month was, interestingly, a 1 million metric ton increase in Ethiopian production.
In terms of wheat trade,
we did decrease Russian exports by 2 million metric tons,
with the Europeans and Ukrainians picking up Russia's decline. On the U.S. supply and demand front,
we trimmed seed use 2 million bushels. It's a small change, but if that goes along, that's the direct effect of that reduction in winter wheat seedings that we saw from NAST.
Feed and residual was decreased by 30 million bushels.
So ending stocks up 33 million bushels.
Regarding wheat prices,
increased the midpoint price by 10 cents to $6.10, have about 3/4 of it marketed at $6.10 so far.
With that price support coming from the lowered winter wheat seeding numbers. For USDA Radio, Susan Carter, Washington, D.C.
Investing for your future can be confusing sometimes with all the different types of accounts out there. Rod Bain with the U.S. Department of Agriculture helps decipher the difference between traditional and Roth IRAs.
If you are saving for retirement, is an individual retirement account part of your retirement plans? And if so, what do you have? With several IRA products out there, it may be hard to understand what is what and how they work. So with that, extension agents like Barbara O'Neill of Rutgers University offer an explanation, sort of the ABCs of the IRAs. Now, confusion may occur when it comes to different types of individual retirement accounts. O'Neill explains two of the more popular ones.
The traditional IRA, which may or may not have a tax deduction on the front end, depending on an individual or a household income and their access to employer plans. And the Roth IRA, that's funded with after-tax dollars. So that means money that has already been taxed.
Now, contribution limits for both types of plans are the same.
For Roth or traditional. This year, the limit is $5,500. That's the maximum for a person under age 50, and then you can do another $1,000 or $6,500 if you're 50 and over.
After that, though, there are some differences between traditional and Roth IRAs.
There are different tax credits on your tax form, and to the extent that you can lower what's called your adjusted gross income, or AGI, you may be able to qualify for certain things.
So contributions to traditional IRAs are tax deductible, while that's not the case for Roth contributions. As for withdrawals,
with a traditional IRA, the government wants to have you keep your money invested, so there are penalties if you take your money out before age 59 and a half. Then there's also a requirement that you must start taking what they call required minimum distributions, or RMDs, once you reach the age of 70 and a half.
Meanwhile, the money in a Roth IRA has already been taxed.
So if you need to take out your own money, so to speak, the money that you've already contributed with after-tax dollars, you can do that at any time. Now, as far as taking out the earnings on your money, the law says that you need to be age 59 and a half and have had the account open at least 5 years to be able to take out those earnings tax-free.
And another benefit of the Roth IRA, you can take a penalty-free early withdrawal if it's used to pay for higher education expenses for yourself or a qualifying family member. And if understanding traditional versus Roth IRAs is not confusing enough, O'Neill points out there are other types of retirement accounts.
A spousal IRA, if you've got a one-income family and one earner is contributing for the savings account of the non-working spouse. And then there's also rollover IRAs that come in handy when people are leaving a job, for example, and maybe taking money from that 401k and putting it in a tax-deferred IRA when they leave their job.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
While the weather's starting to settle down a bit over much of the country, one area right now is getting from Mother Nature what one expert calls
a bit of a sneak attack.
Agriculture Department meteorologist Brad Rippey says if you live in the southern mid-Atlantic area, you may be right in the middle of that attack as we speak.
With a little bit of wintry weather in areas that don't typically receive snow, sleet, and freezing rain. So we're looking at parts of the Carolinas into Virginia experiencing a mid-January winter mess.
It's not a big storm, doesn't have a lot of energy behind it, but it's bringing
enough snow, sleet, and freezing rain to cause some significant travel disruptions.
Also, all the way across the country in the Pacific Northwest, there may be one other possible disruption as rains start to pelt western Washington state, which has already had flooding and mudslides this season, but Rippey says
that threat may return to parts of the Pacific Northwest
starting late week into this weekend. So even as things are starting to come out of the deep freeze a little bit for a while, the weather problems continue. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
Minnesota has started to set up its medical marijuana dispensaries, but like Washington State found out, it may come with some major obstacles.
It's been just a little over a year since voters in Washington state voted to legalize the growing and selling of marijuana. And for farmers and the people who sell farm inputs to them,
it's brought a whole new game to town for us to try to figure out.
Figure out is right. Gary Farrell owns a farm supply company, Sheeny, Washington. He says, naturally, farmers have been very interested in this new possible crop.
And, of course, they know nothing about that other than they see there's possibly big money in the end.
The state has been certifying farmers to grow it, making sure they fall within the strict guidelines.
They must have security 24/7. You know, some of the areas where they're allowed to put these production facilities, you know, they're required to be so many feet from within certain boundaries and so on and so forth.
Well, that's fine, but Farrell says most farmers have no idea and hopefully no prior experience in how to actually grow pot.
So they come to us and ask advice as to what type of products should they be using, from fertilizers, or do they need fungicides, or what to do. And we're sitting there going, we don't know.
So the farm supply store owners can't help the farmers very much in that way, and so
we look for guidance then from the manufacturing community, and there's nothing that is labeled for use on cannabis, marijuana, either. So it kind of leaves us with a real problem of what products can we use and not use, and where do we go for these types of things?
Gary Farrell says farmers have erected a lot of greenhouses over this last year specifically to grow marijuana, so there has been some growing concern among farmers.
Because these people have a lot of money invested in this. And, they don't want something being sold to them that should accidentally go in and kill their crop.
Or that they can get in trouble over using because it's not labeled by EPA for that use. As all of that is being worked out, officials running the project in Washington State have run into another little bump in the road.
They opened their retail facilities before they had enough supply, so the retail facilities didn't have anything to sell because the growers hadn't been allowed to grow yet. But here we are.
Here we are. So the marijuana industry in Washington State has not quite started on the high that was expected, but Farrell says it's certainly interesting.
It is.
It is. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
As a precursor to next week's State of the Union address, President Obama taped a presentation from the Oval Office on how to improve internet access, particularly in rural areas of the country. He talked about how one small area is able to compete with major national and international cities.
Cedar Falls isn't a really big place. You only got 40,000 people in Cedar Falls. But the reason they can compete with these other world cities is because citizens got together and made the investment to bring competition in and make sure that internet speeds were just as fast there as anywhere else.
Building on the existing net neutrality plan, Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack says,
we at USDA want to be part of that process,
which includes the announcement of
the availability of resources under our Community Connect grant program, which has been already at work throughout rural America, providing $66 million of assistance.
That's on top of the $3.5 billion USDA is already investing in over 300 projects nationwide under the Recovery Act. For USDA Radio, Susan Carter, Washington.